Okay, so welcome tonight. We're going to talk about Debugger, specifically in Chrome. A debugger is actually part of browsers. So Firefox has a debugger, Chrome has a debugger, but we're specifically going to be looking at the Chrome debugger tonight, as well as the debugging process. So just having a debugger isn't always useful. You need to know how to debug. So I think we've all used know that, if we've been doing JavaScript some and gotten to that point in the curriculum, we know that debugger exists. And we know that we can typically put it, anywhere in JavaScript and our code will stop and debugger will pop up and it will be there for us and we can step through functions and we've heard all this stuff and we've seen these cool things happen. But I think most of us have been exposed to it in a throw it in there, see what happens, play around with it, and that's how, we're going to figure out how to use it, and hopefully it's helpful. And it is. But we're going to go through an example here and really look a little bit at the core functions of debugger and how it can be used. And when I was looking to put this together, I came across a tutorial by Google about debugger in Chrome. So I figured what better place than to follow along with that and just answer questions along the way and get a good grounding in debugger and what it is and how to use it in the debugging process. So here we have an intentionally buggy app in JavaScript. It's a simple app, has some JavaScript, has some HTML, that's it, vanilla JavaScript, nothing special on that front. But the first thing that we need to do is reproduce our bug. So let's find out what our bug is here. Do 5. We see they're supposed to add. We do 2. Click add. We get 52. So it's like, okay, I can kind of see that. That's adding in a very explicit form of the word adding, but that's probably not what our expected function to do. We want this to actually do addition like a calculator. So we found the bug that we're going to fix. And this is the bug. So now we need to get into our sources to our dev tool. So Control-Shift-I will open that up for us. You can also open it, right-click, to inspect. That'll open it up for you. And you're on the page. That just takes you to the elements as opposed to Control-Shift-I, which will take you to the console. The only difference between where those two take you, so if you're used to using one over the other, there's no right or wrong way. I just find keyboard shortcuts good time for me. It'll be Control-Shift-I on Windows and Linux, and Command-Option-I on Mac. And this is for Chrome, although Chrome was the leader in this, getting this developed, the dev tools. So I've found that a lot of things are mimicked on other browsers. So if you're on Firefox, Control-Shift-I or Command-Option-I can do the same exact thing and open up their dev tools. And they're going to look pretty similar too. Don't worry if yours aren't black, or I guess mine are dark gray. I just set that up that way. It's one of the settings. If you play around in the setting, it's in here. Yeah, theme start. Now we're in our console. We want to look at our sources page. This is where our debugger comes into play. Okay. That's good. So the sources panel has 3 parts. The first part is the file navigator, which we have here. We see this is the HTML page. There's the JavaScript. And this is the code editor pane. Excuse me. So we see we even have tabbed up here. Multiple files open. And our last area, which is squashed in here right now. So I was thinking it might be a better. Maybe that'll be a little bit better. Yeah, okay, there. Now we have file viewer, code editor, and our JavaScript debugging pane takes up at least half width, so it won't be as hard to see. And this has various tools for inspecting the page's JavaScript. Yeah. Oh, I like it there. At least there. So one of the most common methods, like we were talking about, for debugging the problem, well, there's two common ways in JavaScript. One is the console log way, which I think a lot of us get really used to. It's the way I'm most comfortable. It's, saying, okay, I have JavaScript, and, I want to know what's going on in my JavaScript. So let's see. Like, okay, I want to know what add1 is. I want a console log, that variable. Do that again. Console log, that variable. Find out what it is. Panel. Run it. And shift. Control. Let's control shift. D. Either way. And then, do our thing, post in the console. However, it isn't the best way to work with JavaScript code. You have to run everything all the time. It's not efficient, and it's a pain. You end up leaving console logs in your code that you probably shouldn't, because now you're throwing things into the console all the time, and it's not clean. And typically you have to go back and forth between your code editor, because you're not writing all of your code here. You're writing in the code editor, then you save it, then you come back, then you reload the page, then you execute it, then you look at your console log, then you go back and you edit it, and you keep going back and forth. So the console log methods can get the job done, but our debugger breakpoints are going to get it done faster. And that's because debugger breakpoints are like, they stop code in the middle of execution. So it's just like, well, not just like, but very similar to pry, which I think most people are hopefully, have used well through the Rails part of the curriculum, and learn to utilize the power of pry. So debugger is doing the same type of thing. So a couple things that are going to make this easier on us using debugger. Console log doesn't give us that frame of reference. Typically, we know exactly where that console log is, but sometimes we leave them in there and we forget. I've definitely had things, pop up in the console, and I've had to go hunt them down and find them. Whereas we also have to load the page every time to fire those consoles, or fire a function to fire those console logs. However, with our debugger, we can drop it in there, not have to worry about how things are structured, not have to worry about where we are in the code. It's going to stop for us. In addition, our console log is limited by what we tell it. So if we don't say, let's say, we console log this add-in 1, but we don't console log add-in 2, we're never going to see add-in 2 until we explicitly put it in a console log. But our debugger is going to be, we're going to be able to see the values of all the variables at that moment in time. And this is very interesting, and I think especially as code gets more complex, because there's going to be things that are more complex and things that sit on the edge of our application that we don't even realize are affecting our code, and they are. So being able to see all the variables is definitely a plus. So looking at this app, we can probably, just by looking at the functionality, figure out what's going on. We have 2 form fields. We have a button. When we click the button, something happens, and it shows there. Looking at our HTML, we can see, or JavaScript, we can see that we have an on-click function. Check state inputs are empty. Wonderful inputs are empty. Updating the label, and such. And we have our inputs, label, and button. We have a click listener. So we probably want to pause our code for this in this instance about the time or around where our click happens, because I don't think that there's an issue with our forms or the functionality of what it does when there isn't anything entered. It's just when we click and what happens after that click that we have issues. So in our debugger pane, we click Event Lister Breakpoint. So here we have an expandable list of categories of event listeners. Now we're looking for a click event. Let's open up mouse. And here we have mouse events. So we know that we're targeting the click. Let's hit that one. Now, our DevTools, we've set it up to automatically pause when any click event listener executes. Now let's change this around a little bit. Or it probably actually fires every time. It's just we don't see it change. There's our click. We paused the demo automatically and highlighted a line of code. Right here. In our sources panel. Also that listener dot click function Okay. I think that was because of I want to see. Okay. I think it's because we did it once before that it stopped in a different place than I thought it would. So better click. Let's put our numbers in again. Oh no, it's because I have other things. I have extensions that are it's stopping that are in the mix. Like I have this Grammarly extension that checks the spelling in boxes, and I get some weird things because of that. Like stuff is executing because of that. Okay, now I know what's going on. Extension. Okay, let's refresh this page. And every time I was clicking into these boxes, it was firing. Okay, like so we're stopping on this function. I'm not sure where it's coming from. But another function that we're looking for, if you had nothing in the browser, would be this onClick, which is where I was thinking I was going to stop. But I obviously have something in there. The content.js is not in our files at all. So in our get_started.js, which is where we're looking for this code, because as far as we know, we only have these two files. We stop on our onClick. So ultimately, we want to know and get to know these breakpoints well. Obviously, it takes time. But knowing what they are, especially the event listeners, make it a lot easier to debug without having to know exactly where in code things are yourself. So now we know, okay, let's say we were stepping into this app and we didn't have source code. We know, oh, in the getItStarted.js file, let's look at this function. So another common cause of JavaScript code having bugs is the order of the functions, which can easily happen. You know, we don't think about how it's executing in the browser. We're just looking at how we're using functions and how we're using things in the code. So in our JavaScript debugger, we have our step into next function call. Now this will let us drop through this function one line at a time and see exactly what's happening. And how it's executing. Oh, the guy. Our Chrome extensions are throwing this. And Chrome's name stuff. Actually, let's do this real quick. There, incognito window. should have, I don't have any plugins enabled on Incognito. Oh, the mouse. I can't click. Okay, there we go. Things are working better now. Okay. So now we go right to on-click function. Okay. So remember the incognito window when you want to use Debugger too, because if you're like me, you probably have a lot of extensions on your browsers, and they're going to be a pain to work with, like we just saw. You can step down. We see that, inputs aren't empty, and our code moves to here. Next. Now we also have this step over next function call. And what that will do is it'll execute the next function without stepping through it. And reactive tool. Oh, there's still one more. Always one. Allow incognito. There. Okay. It's driving me crazy. Now it's like, oh, I'm on the other window. Okay. One more time. Okay. This executes functions without stepping into them. And it'll skip over some lines of code because this is returning false. So the basic idea of stepping through code is, when we look at the code, we can figure out that, okay, we're looking at when the function fires, and we can see that in our website, we still haven't seen anything appear. So we've stepped through this function, this kind of function, and we step over the next function call, we see update label fires, and then our code appears. So it's probably somewhere in this update label function. Now, we don't always have to use, these listener breakpoints exactly, but they're a good place to start. If we end up stepping through a ton of code, then maybe we're not setting our breakpoint close enough, because we're going to want to come back to our breakpoint typically when we fix or think that we fixed our code. So we can set a line of code as a breakpoint as well. And that's probably the most common type of breakpoint, as opposed to the event listener breakpoint. And that's probably what you've seen before. So let's look at breakpoint. So here we can see that we're on line 32 of this code. If we click this line number, we see that we have a little icon on it. It's orange on mine because I have the dark, but it would be blue if it was light gray. you had the other thing. So now, this is a line of code breakpoint. We've set it just like this. Now what's going to happen is DevTools is always going to stop before this line of code executes. Let's go back through and put some new numbers. Here we go. So our JavaScript is running, line 39 finishes, and before line 32 runs, it stops. What this also does, shows us these variables. So addend 1 is 99, addend 2, 77, sum equals 99, 77. And then tells us addend 1. So here's where we can start trying to figure out what's going on. And the first thing to notice is that our variables are strings. They're wrapped in parentheses. Now, this could be causing our issue because we know that in JavaScript, if you use the add function on strings, it squashes them together because, it says, if you have two strings and you add them together, then you want one longer string. So to execute the next function without stepping through it is, we can go back to that. Let's get our So when we step into function calls, we're going line by line. And we're looking at these things. We're going function by function in that. So what's happening, we're seeing if inputs are empty. What's happening is our next line is executing this inputs are empty function. So right now we're on our if. And when inputs empty fires, we're going to jump down into that function. So this line 15 is executing, and we get line 22. And now it's saying if, so we're on the if statement still, get number 1. So now we're going to go to get number 1. And we're on the return. We got a return. Return is going to return this, and now we evaluate this value. And we go back. And now it's hard to see, but get number 2 is highlighted. Now we're going to do this get number 2 function. And we know, okay, we're going to return. And we're going to evaluate that. We're going to come back. This if finished evaluating after get number 2, and it was false. So we get to, now the next thing to evaluate is this return. And it's going to return false. So now we finished our inputs to empty function. And we come back up to our onClick function, and we have this came back false. So the next thing to fire is update label. So the way that differs is if we do this step over next function call, we hit our if, and then we hit our update label. So this if was stepped over. It's still executed, but instead of looking at every piece of this if statement, so the inputs to empty, and we went to inputs to empty, and we looked at what this function did and what this function did, and how it came back and returned false. It came back, and then got to here, we just let it run. If that makes sense. We didn't step through every part of it, we just let it do its thing. So stepping over, I think, is a good way to kind of, if you're not really sure exactly where you're looking for something, it's a good way to say, okay, well, at least it's going to, take me, let me see, okay, now I know that after this fires, then that's where I'm getting my issue. And then stepping through, you're going to see everything that fires getting to that endpoint. Go ahead. Okay. So we have multiple ways to examine variables with the dev tools and our JavaScript debugger. One way is going to be this scope pane. So scope pane shows us what our local and global variables are. When we're stopped on a line of code. These are local variables, and 1, and then 2, some that are local to this function. And global variables, we don't have any set. These are just things that the browser that automatically uses for us. Lots of things if we choose to use them. But local variables, global variables, and the values of them, yeah. We can also edit these variables in here. And you double click the variable if you want to edit it. If we're not paused, this window is going to be empty. Second thing that we have is this watch. It's actually watch expression, so no watch expression. And this lets us monitor the values of variables over time. So, and as its name says, this isn't just for variables. So any JavaScript expression can be used in a watch expression. So let's do add expression. Type of sum. And press enter. So now we see the type of sum is string. So now we know that our sum variable is a string. For sure is a string. So before we were assuming it because we saw string, but now we know for sure that it is a string. So we have a third way to look at our variables, which is our console. And look at that. You have that open. So here, get our integer of 1. And we're seeing what we've changed it to, 78. Or we can just look at what append1 is. This is kind of our playground now. So when we stopped code in something like pry, when it stopped for us, the playground was right there. That's where we did everything. But here, we use our console. So if we wanted to say, okay, this should you know, I want these to add together right, and they're not right now. So let's figure out how to do this. Well, we need to turn these into integers. So we have our parse int. And so all that we need to do is that to both of them. Let's see what that gets us. 85. I think that's doing what we needed to do. And the reason this works is because even though Z1 and Z2 are local variables to this function, we are stopped right here between line 31 and 32 and have access to all the variables that are available at that point in the code. So now, we figured out a fix, but we want to try it out without having to go to our code editor, change the code, save the code, reload the page, run the page. You know, we want to see if we can get it working here before we decide if we want to apply the change to our code. So we can edit it directly in our DevTools. So let's get that through. Here, let's change this to our parse. What should that copy source? One, two. Okay, there's our parse int. Now, have a little star, save. So I just did Control S, Command S on Mac to save. We want to deactivate our breakpoint at this point. We want to leave it there because, you know, if it doesn't work, we want to be able to easily get back to it, especially if this was, you know, a lot of code. So we can deactivate it with our deactivate breakpoint. Now this is going to ignore our breakpoint. We see breakpoint listed here. It shows us its context. It shows us where. We could also deactivate it like that because we might have multiple breakpoints. So this is going to deactivate all of them and just let our code run. So now, let's see if we can put in some new numbers. 35, 12. We got 47. Sweet. Not adding our strings together, it's changing them to integers and adding them. So now we've figured out, you know, our bug. And we go back, take this little piece of code, paste it into our code editor, save it, and be happy. There's many other ways to set breakpoints. There is as well the debugger way, where in your code, you can throw debugger in pretty much anywhere that has JavaScript. Save. When you get to that debugger, it's like setting the breakpoint. And we see we get our variables again. We're getting all of our info. We see our type of sum is number now instead of string. We did something like let's do this. Oh, didn't want to delete that. undefined. Now we see sum as a string. Now we see sum as a number. We're watching this expression. Now we get back to undefined because we get out of the scope of where this is. But yeah, you can set debugging breakpoints like this as well. Comment them out. You won't see the breakpoints listed down here because it doesn't know about them. The same way as if you add them as such. There's lots of cool things to play with. That's a solid baseline that I think has more than most people understand. I think a lot of people really just know, put debugger in anywhere, and in Chrome it's going to stop. And from there, you can look at your variables, kind of figure things out. But there's a lot more to it than just that. And you can run your code in here, and you can save it, and you can execute it. Granted, the JavaScript has to be available in your browser. Sometimes it isn't always. So that's one limitation. Yeah, so tonight we looked at debugging with Debugger, how to debug the steps to debugging some, replicating the bug, finding where the bug is, starting to gather information about the bug, testing out solutions for the bug, implementing a solution, and seeing that it works. Pretty much everything except actually adding it to the code and saving it. We looked at stepping through functions. We looked at stepping over functions. We looked at our scope panel and our watch expressions panel. We looked at our event listener breakpoints and the host of them that are available to us to use. We looked at setting breakpoints to our, I guess we can call these carrots. For line numbers, I guess, line numbers, that's a good one. We got setting breakpoints using the debugger keyword, which we can save in our code and comment out. Very similar to using Pry. We used that, looked at how we have our console as our playground, so to speak, for playing with the code and what's available to our code at that point in time. What variables we have, what we can do there, play around with our functions and see what happens. Yeah, that's the review of what we went through tonight. So, any questions that I can answer for you? Have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to leave that time when possible for questions, comments, concerns. Welcome, Eric, and glad you enjoyed and learned something. Welcome, Heather.